up on the signs of whether or not a girl is into them. So today I want to do a little quiz so you can see if she actually does like you, or even just how good you are at recognizing signals that you might be getting. Let's say you're in a bar and you look across the length of the counter and you see a cute girl who glances at you briefly, does a quick hair flip, and then turns back to her friends. Is she into you? Eye contact is obviously a good sign, but you really can't tell from this example. She could just be adjusting her hair, and maybe she was looking at someone behind you. So let's say you're at the office and your cute coworker is waiting behind you to make some copies of whatever people make copies of, and she says, "Wow, do you think you could go any slower?" and then playfully punches your arm. Is she into you? Again, you can't really tell from this example either. She might like you, but she might just be giggling and punching your arm as a sarcastic middle school throwback, so really no way to tell. Okay, so let's say you're at the gym on the elliptical for some reason, and Cutie McBooty comes in and gets on the exercise bike in front of you. And then after 5 minutes, she looks back and says, "Wow, I'm so sweaty already. If only there were a way to get the same workout at home riding something else." And then gives you a wink. She into you? Yeah, I still can't tell with that one. Exercise equipment is pretty expensive, and maybe she lives in a small apartment and just doesn't have space. So maybe you find a good deal on rowing machines somewhere, you can show her the flyer. Okay, so let's say you meet up with a friend that you've had coffee and drinks with a couple times, and she says, "I had a lot of fun on the last few dates we went on." That's a good sign because she thought those hangouts were actually dates. So suppose then she says, "How'd you like to come back to my place and watch Netflix tonight?" That's another good sign. It's usually a pretty good indicator when a girl invites you to do something, especially at her place. So then let's say later at her house you guys are watching Wall-E or something like that, and she says, "I'm getting pretty bored, why don't you come upstairs with me?" That's another great sign. She probably has something pretty interesting to do upstairs if it's better than watching Wall-E. So then after you go up there, all of a sudden she pushes you onto her bed, dims the lights, rips off her clothes, and you start having sex. Is she into you? Yeah, again, you really can't be too sure. It's pretty dark in the room, so she can't really see you properly. Maybe she's from Canada and was just being polite. Anyway, best bet is to just keep your wits about you and continue to look for signs.
First dates are very exciting, but also stressful for everyone involved. For guys, for girls, and for any nosy bystanders who can't mind their own business. And as one of those people, I wanted to create this as a bit of a primer for first dates, whether you've never been on a date before and want to know what to expect, or if you're a veteran of the dating scene and just want to figure out what's wrong with you. So of course, before you even go on a first date, you have to ask someone out. And there's a million ways to do that. In person, over the internet. That's pretty much it, really. But you either get a yes or a no, and it's as simple as that. And the good news is that if you do get a yes, you're already ahead of the game because the other person is saying they like you, or at the very least you're passably better than a vacant time slot. Now, the first consideration is, of course, where you're going to go and what you're going to do. And in my opinion, you should really choose a date activity that reflects how well you know the other person. Like if you met by limp-wristedly flicking your index finger across a cracked iPhone, then there's nothing wrong with ice cream and a walk in the park because we all know you're there to see how they eat soft serve. On the other hand, if you've been platonic friends for 5 years hoping your next haircut is the one that will tip them over the edge, you better have a lot of alcohol planned because your current personality just isn't cutting it. So the most classic date idea is, of course, dinner and a movie, but unless you interpret that with multiple layers of euphemism, it's a bit cliche for a first date and a bit too reminiscent of its old school origin, which is getting married before you're 22, raising a family, and making God proud, which just isn't up to date with today's poor and sinful youth. I think your best bet is going with coffee, drinks, or a quick bite to eat, but it doesn't hurt to eventually try to expand your repertoire. I think it's a really smart idea to come up with fun activities that you can do together so you can focus on doing the activity instead of worrying about what to say. A few of my favorites include drunk paint night, drunk baking, drunk Lego, and drunk stand-up comedy. The common element being, of course, they're all things I do when I'm alone. Now, that brings us to the real nitty-gritty of a first date, which is how you're supposed to act. And you might have heard the old classic turn of phrase, just be yourself. And this is a terrible idea for a multiplicity of reasons, but what I think it really means and should be said more explicitly is that you shouldn't pretend to be something that you're not. So if they're like, "Oh, what do you do in your spare time?" and you like to play video games, then say, "I like to play video games." Don't make shit up to try to sound cool, and besides, how you talk about something is way more important than what you're talking about. Even if you're into something like coin collecting, you could be like, I like coin collecting. Did you know that just by holding one in my hand, I can tell you the year that any 10-cent coin was produced? And when they say, what, really? Why only 10-cent coins? You can say, because I only date dimes. And then you show them your YouTube channel. The old 1-2 works every time. Now, unrelated, at a certain point you reach a difficult moment, which is figuring out if the date is going well, and girls and guys have their own distinct problems in this department. And from asking girls about their experiences on dates, the most common thing that seems to happen is thinking either, wow, why isn't he making a move? Or, oh shit, he thinks this is a date. On the flip side, the most common thing for guys to think is, I don't have a clue what's going on, which actually explains just about everything. So if you do find yourself confused in the moment, you just have to triangulate those perspectives and Sigmund Freud yourself deep in their psyche to figure it out. And if that doesn't work, you can say you like them and see what happens. So very presumptuously, assuming the date went well, wherever you are, it's time to settle up the bill and leave. Now in today's day and age, guys are often confused as to whether or not they should be paying or splitting the bill or what. And really, the only person I know who said, well, he was great, but didn't pay for dinner, so that's a no, is my mum. So don't make a joke about that unless you pay for her meal. Sorry, Jen, you asked for this. But don't worry too much about it. If you're the one who asks them out, offer to pay. They might offer to split, and then it'll be awkward for a few sentences, but you guys will figure it out. Now, this is really the part where it gets interesting, because after you walk to the most proximal waypoint between both of your houses, you're going to stand there for about 5 seconds, glance down at your feet for a second, and say, yeah, so, and then you have to talk about your feelings. So what do? Do you set up a second date? Do you go for a kiss? Do you invite them to your place? Do you walk them home? Or do you kind of sit on the curb, talk for 2 hours, and then go home because you're both too scared to be emotionally vulnerable? I think at the very least you should leave saying you had fun and want to get together again, or get out of there and let them down softly with a text pretending it's you when it's really them. Now, I know what you're all thinking, casually explained. What do you think of people hooking up on a first date? And as long as you're not my neighbor and are both down with it, I couldn't care less. Nowadays, it seems like everyone is having sex before holding hands anyway. But with that said, while I'm not judging you for busting out the strap-on from day one, God certainly is. So, light a candle. Don't call them daddy. Call them father. Don't finish with hallelujah, finish with a condom, just the obvious really, you'll be fine.
Whoa, no way! Now, I'm no expert on dating, which is why you can trust I know what I'm talking about. So whenever it comes to first dates, the obvious question is, how do I get one? And I'm no pickup artist, I say, hoping you would have thought otherwise, but there's no magic words you can use to convince someone to go on a date with you. And if there was, the closest we have is writing, "You have beautiful eyes," in the Pornhub comment section. In reality, getting a date in this day and age is pretty straightforward. Convey that you're an attractive enough person in both looks and personality, and then wait for your step-parents to go on a cruise. Now, the obvious way most people nowadays are getting first dates is dating apps like Tinder and Bumble, and in my experience, a lot of people feel like they aren't getting what they want. Guys say things like, "Oh, I never get any matches, it's a waste of time unless you're like a male model." And then their profile is a blurry photo of them in cargo shorts holding a foot-long Chinook salmon. Now, I hate to break it to you, but if you expect to match with a Victoria's Secret model, you're going to have to get up to at least a 3-foot halibut. Similarly, a lot of attractive women say things like, there's just no good guys on here. It's like, why do I even try? And then their bio is like, Sophie, 25, love to meet new friends and have fun, winky face. And as a guy, when you see someone put like no effort into their bio, you just think, yeah, still pretty hot. So now that we flash forward in time and you've got a date, we can start getting to the real issues. Now, there are a lot of questions I found on Reddit from people who've never gone on a date before, and so I wanted to get those out of the way really quickly before we move on. Where should I go for a first date? Somewhere you'd enjoy going by yourself anyway. So yeah, drinks. Where should I go if I'm not 21? I don't know, church? Who should pay on a date? This depends on if you made a YouTube video that month or not. So yeah, usually her. Is it bad to have sex on the first date? Well, I'm afraid it's 2021, so the question isn't whether you had sex, it's whether you held hands. Should you tell her your sexual fetishes on the first date? No. That's why we have Twitch. Okay, so let's get down to the biggest first date mistakes.
Making the fact that you're on a date ambiguous. One of the most common feels bad man scenarios is going on a date with someone to somewhere fairly platonic, like a cafe, and halfway through your coffee, they start talking about their boyfriend, and you're like, oh, no, hey, I don't know what you thought this was, and I probably didn't communicate this properly, but, like, I'm down to experiment, dude. Leading with money. A lot of guys think that girls like men with a lot of money. This is false. Girls like cool men with a lot of money. So, unfortunately, she's not going to be impressed that you bought GameStop and AMC at the top, even though you're sure it's going to squeeze any time now. Slow texting. A lot of new daters feel they have to artificially stagger their texting to seem busy or unavailable. This is stupid because you are available. Instead, you should artificially stagger your texting because you're overthinking every word of your response. Bragging. Bragging is probably one of the worst things you can do on a date because you convey to the other person that you're insecure about your social value unless you leverage your one unrelated source of measurable significance. Worrying about what to say. Most people get really nervous on dates, filter themselves too much, and awkwardly run out of things to say. The common advice that you'll find is that it's not what you say that matters, it's how you say it, which is mostly true, but that's like saying, don't be nervous and just be cool, you idiot. If you actually want the solution to being so nervous, in my experience, it's A, it's fine not to say anything, and B, have a storyline. If you know the topics and stories you really want to share, then you can just completely improvise. If this first section is your trip to Coco Bongo in Cancun, it might be a 5-minute story, but the conversation will inevitably splinter into her trip to Mexico, clubbing, regrettable experiences, and getting kidnapped by the cartel. Then when those topics run out, you just say, anyway, and go back to the main storyline. If you then run out of storyline entirely and the date gets really awkward, just grab your emergency kit, roofie yourself, and wake up the next day embarrassment-free. Doing something that doesn't match your personality. If you're chatty and personable, go for drinks. If you're more subdued and aren't good at talking, do an activity like hiking or pool or board games and allow her to absorb your personality by destroying her. Bullet chess. Play to your strengths and your lifestyle. If you're an attractive guy, use Tinder. If you're really charismatic, get yourself into more social circles. If you're neither, like honestly, cheers. Oh, God. Our date with each other today has been sponsored by ExpressVPN. Now, if you don't know, ExpressVPN allows you to reroute your internet connection to nearly any country in the world. And at this point, I basically used ExpressVPN for everything. Unblocking shows like South Park and Top Gear on Netflix by rerouting to the UK, watching YouTube videos that are unavailable in my country,
So I think as a guy, it's really easy to see a girl you want to talk to, but you're too scared to actually go and do it. So I want to take a few situations you might find yourself in, and by asking yourself, what's the worst that could happen? I think it can really help make it easier to figure out whether you should make a move or not. Okay, so let's say you finished another unproductive work day and are walking down the street, and all of a sudden you see your favorite celebrity of the moment being escorted by a couple bodyguards. They seem to be in a rush, so before you make an approach, ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, there's a good chance you'll get tackled, and I think she's married, so not really worth the risk. Best be on with your day and keep a lookout for better opportunities. Okay, so let's say you're standing in line at the coffee shop waiting for the caffeine to bring you happiness, and after noticing the cute barista, you've been staring at her for a few minutes, and you're pretty sure she's looked back at you a few times, but it could just be to see if you've stopped. She might have winked just then, but the angle made it so you couldn't really see her other eye very well. Could have just been a regular blink. So ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, it's her job to be nice to customers, so you'll probably embarrass yourself in front of the whole cafe. Times are tough, and she was probably just trying to get that 16% tip. Wouldn't be the end of the world, but best wait for a better opportunity and never go back to that coffee shop again. Alright, so let's say you're sitting in the bar with your friend, wondering if people think you're gay, and all of a sudden a pretty girl runs in and says, "Hey, I saw you from outside. I thought you were really attractive and seem exactly like my type. I just had to come over and give you my number." Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, some guys might miss the obvious here, but don't be an idiot. There's clearly a hidden camera somewhere. Don't want to make a fool of yourself, so best be on with your day and wait for a better opportunity. So as the day is coming to an end, you're walking home through the park, and all of a sudden you see a little golden retriever puppy playing in the daffodils. And when you look around to see who it belongs to, you see a girl sitting alone on a picnic blanket. She's reading your favorite book, wearing a yellow sundress with glasses that are a bit too big, so she has to keep pushing them back up as she's concentrating. Has those little dimples on her cheek from smiling all the time, and probably has a really subtle Scandinavian accent that you'd only notice with certain words. Then as you walk by, she places her book down to stretch, and after a few seconds she makes eye contact with you, gives you a little wave, and then pats the space on the blanket next to her. So you go sit down, and her dog jumps all over you right away, and she says, "Wow, she's usually nervous to meet new people. It must be a good sign." Ask yourself, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, you don't want to get your heart broken. Honestly, there would be no rebounding from that one. Always have tomorrow, so best be on with your day and keep waiting for a better opportunity.
They say that the heart is a muscle, so in order for it to get stronger, you have to train it to failure. And while America is speedrunning that in real time, today we're talking about breakups. Breakups, also known in this economy as finding new roommates, is when you're in a serious romantic relationship with a partner and then say to yourself, I don't want to be with this person anymore. You then think, maybe a dog will fix this. When that doesn't work, you then think, maybe a kid will fix this. But I digress. I didn't mean to drag you into this. Conventionally, a breakup occurs in 5 stages, so I thought I'd go through each one step by step so you can see where and if you're on that timeline. Stage 1. The first stage of a breakup is always the hardest, which is finding someone to date in the first place. A reason why this stage is important is because the way that you get into a relationship in the first place can really determine your individual attitudes towards each other as it progresses. For example, when a girl gets asked out and she says yes, she's thinking, wow, what a cool guy, I'm so happy, my life's going to be so much better. But when a guy asks out a girl and she says yes, he's thinking, uh-oh, she must be an idiot. Stage 2. Seeing red flags in the relationship. Now, if you're watching this and think you're in a good relationship right now, it might be a good idea to check for signs that it's heading south before it actually gets there. So I decided to browse r/relationship advice in order to become an expert on the topic so I can share some examples of more subtle red flags you might not pick up on and how you should respond. Let's say you've been dating your girlfriend for 5 years and you live together. One day she's at work and you walk into the living room and see a magazine open on the coffee table to a jewelry ad. You look closer and see a couple engagement rings that are circled and one in particular with love hearts around it. How should you respond? Exactly, she's obviously never mentioned it, but she's clearly cheating on you with her husband, so best to break up and tell her that you're moving on. Let's say you've been on a few dates with a girl and you feel you have great chemistry. While you're creeping her socials as usual, suddenly she texts you, hey, I miss you, can we hang out again soon? Now this is of course a great sign, but you don't want to seem too needy, so set a timer for 1 hour so you can respond at exactly the right time. After that, a few minutes go by and then she sends you a message on Instagram. It's a picture of her in the hospital, kissing a bald guy on the cheek with the caption, me with my stepbrother. How should you respond? Exactly, I know Johnny sins when I see him. Best to wait the remaining 56 minutes, break up, and tell her that you're moving on. Let's say you're overseas from your partner and have been in a relationship as long as you can remember, but are currently having a big fight about the joint vision of your future. You want to pursue a more down-to-earth existence on your farm, selling hemp and cotton clothing you've grown yourself, but they're reaching their financial peak and want to experience the luxuries of life. You message them that you want to end the relationship, but they respond, to do what? To run your stupid little farm? I'm the one making all the money. How do you plan on being able to afford to do that without me subsidizing you? How should you respond? Exactly, you've already figured out a great way to keep labor costs down. Best to just declare independence and tell them you're moving on. Stage 3. The breakup. While breakups aren't fun for anyone, men in particular don't usually take rejection very well, whether it's from girls, election results, or especially art school. This is because if you're a girl and your female friend goes through a breakup, the game plan is clear. She'll text, "We broke up," to the group chat, then you all get together immediately, have a few bottles of wine, talk some shit about their ex, tell your friend she deserves better, and then have a pillow fight or something. For guys, the game plan is much more simple. He'll text the group chat, just a heads up, me and Katie broke up. You then reply, damn, that fucking sucks, dude. You good? He'll then say, yeah, I'm alright. And your job is done. What else could you possibly do? Now, regardless of whether you're a guy or a girl, whenever you're about to break up with someone, it's likely you'll start second-guessing your intuition, and it would be worth it if you struggled to replace them. So you have to ask yourself the most important question to see if you should go through with it. Who's going to pay the other half of the rent? While boomers and Gen X often complain that if you live with someone and break up, they get half your net worth. This, of course, isn't a problem for Gen Z or millennials because half of a negative number is pure profit. The real pain, of course, is losing custody of the houseplants. Similarly, one of the worst situations to be in when you're going through a breakup is when you have kids. This is the worst case scenario because not only is someone breaking up with you, but you also have kids. At some point, you really have to start wondering how you keep fucking up over and over again. Stage 4. Getting over it. Whenever you go through a breakup, the most important thing is to not wallow in your own misery. You should only do that if your ex finds someone new in 2 weeks and they're exactly the same as you but hotter. Now, one of the critical steps of getting over a breakup is thinking about how your own attitudes and behaviors contributed to the relationship falling apart and what you could do better next time. If you ask a girl what would prevent another bad breakup happening to them, they might say, I should be more attentive and affectionate, maybe communicate my thoughts more openly instead of expecting my partner to know, and make sure I don't make them prioritize my feelings at the expense of theirs. To men, self-reflection is of course way too complicated, as we like to have simple, concrete steps rather than vague hypotheticals, which is why if you ask a guy what would prevent another bad breakup happening to them, the answer is a simple 2-step process. Bench 3 plates, Bugatti Chiron. After stage 4, we of course have stage 4. Now they say that one of the best ways to get over someone is to get under someone else, but when you've just gone through a breakup, it's likely been a while since you've been dating, and you might think, well, I think I'm a 7, so that's what I'm looking for. And then someone else will say, I think you're a 5. Now in the dating market, this is called a bid-ask spread, and is essential to establish right away so you can see approximately what type of person is in your league. This is why when I get back on Tinder after a breakup, the first thing I do is set the radius to maximum, but you can pick any size of girl you want. Now, if you've only recently started dating again, the first thing you'll notice is how the dating meta has completely changed. If you're a girl, the first thing you're going to be thinking is, what the fuck is a Riz? And if you're a guy, you're going to be asking yourself, why does every girl I match with keep sending me links to viruses? The good news is that even though you might still be hurt by your fallen relationship, through the experience you've likely grown a lot as a person, so at least you'll have learned from your mistakes and won't have to do it all again. Stage 5. Do it all again. From this point, you simply repeat the process until you accidentally have a child, or you run out of money, or you try a polyamorous relationship until they go exclusive and you're the third wheel, or you get back with your ex and make it work because you overestimated your other options, or you realize that you can't say you don't like broccoli if you've never tried it, so you add grinder to the rotation. Now, one of the worst feelings I've had going through a breakup was when they said, but are you sure? Do you really want to get rid of everything we've done together? I mean, maybe you could just keep me around and use me when you want to. And as much as it hurt to hear that, Microsoft Edge really sucked at the time, and I never thought I'd have to do that to someone again until I found today's sponsor, the Opera One web browser. One of the best features on Opera One is their Aria AI assistant. You can see I asked it the classic relationship tester, would you still love me if I was a worm? And it answered it perfectly. That made me happy and fulfilled.
In dating and relationships, a red flag is a small thing you notice in someone else's behavior that's symptomatic of a bigger problem. The trouble is that oftentimes a red flag can be hard to pick up on because red flags aren't only what someone does, they can also be what they don't do. And some red flags are certainly worse than others, so I want to start with the more mild ones and move up from there. Assuming you start with a blank white flag, at the lowest level we have red and white flags, which are just small quirks or inconsistencies that aren't bad, just kind of weird. Things like they don't lick the yogurt off the lid, they use Internet Explorer, they hold the door open for you as soon as they see you park your car, or they're apologetic even if something is your fault. Basically, if it can be explained with, oh, Canadian, then it's probably in this category. So let's get started on the serious stuff. Low-tier red flags. A low-tier red flag is something that's probably bad, but not necessarily a complete deal breaker. They don't laugh at your jokes. I thought this was just normal, but they say if a girl doesn't laugh at your jokes, she probably isn't very compatible with you. If a girl is really into you though, she'll likely laugh at all your jokes, even if they're not very good. They have a secretive past. This depends a lot on how communicative the person is. They might just be anxious about sharing personal details, but if they have no problem talking about anything and everything except their past, it's either something they don't want you to know, which is pretty bad, or they're a Russian spy, which is pretty hot. Putting you on a pedestal, that is to say they think you're way out of their league. This one's obviously more common for guys to do to girls, but it can go the other way around too. Imagine I was in bed with a girl. Just gonna let that sink in. Imagine I was in bed with a girl and she whispered,
Oh my god, casually explained. Tell me again about how many subscribers you have.
Of course, that would be a huge turn on, and I have dreams about that, but it's probably going to be a pretty one-sided relationship. Think of how celebrities almost always date each other, even though they could be with any fan they wanted. They have the same last name as you. That's a bad sign. In most places. Alright, mid-tier red flags. These are a bit more serious and are usually harder to overcome or talk about. Tread very carefully if you notice any of these. They're a stripper. On paper it might sound well and good, but when it inevitably doesn't work out, you'll realize that from now on you can only pay for things by card. Worth it. They don't have any independence. That is to say, if they have no interests or hobbies or ambitions in their life, it's likely they'll try to involve themselves in every moment of yours, which will eventually weigh you down and get in the way of your goals. Kind of like Reddit. They trash talk their ex a lot early in the relationship. This is usually an indicator they're still emotionally invested in their previous partner, and it can be very difficult to build a new relationship from the rubble of an old one. Got that from Tumblr. Using ultimatums. These are saying things like, you have to do X or I'm going to do Y. You have to watch out though, because that's like me saying, if you don't subscribe, I'm not going to be your friend, which I would never say. Only think. Alright, next is high tier red flags. These are the ones that are complete deal breakers and are pretty much always non-negotiable. They're married, unless you're into that. They're already pregnant, unless you're into that. They're under 18. This isn't just a red flag, it's a felony, but if you do find yourself attracted to girls who are still in high school, a great way to get over that is to talk to one of them. They treat waitstaff poorly. I think being mean to other people in general is a good sign of how they're going to treat you in the future, and I know that'd be hard to deal with because my self-esteem is based on what other people think of me. If you don't like their friends, people tend to be friends with people similar to them, and if someone surrounds themselves with unsavory individuals, it tells you a lot about that person. Now, after a long time, eventually you might find that after going on date after date or going through relationship after relationship, even just after meeting a lot of new people, you start to think, it really seems like pretty much everyone I meet has something wrong with them. They don't get me, they always have problems that they don't think are problems, I can't connect with them at all, and why can't I find someone who's not such a disaster? This is the maximum tier red flag. It's actually just you. This might sound pretty bad, but in a way, realizing that you might be a bit more responsible than you previously thought is the first step to becoming a more wholesome person and having better relationships with other people. And if you have a friend who shared this video with you, now is the moment where you reflect on whether they thought you'd find it funny and interesting, or if they're trying to passive-aggressively tell you something. So, I have some friends who seem to go from relationship to relationship in the span of a few weeks, and others that have been single the entire time I've known them. And it's made me wonder, what are the chances of actually finding the one for you? So after thinking about it for a while, I came up with this formula which can roughly model the probability of meeting the right person after you figure out three things: how often you act on opportunities that arise, how many people you're interested in, and how many encounters you have in a given time frame. Once you figure out what these values are, you can then plug them into the formula to get the hope you have left. So let's start with our opportunity value. Some engineering friends told me that using an O as a variable is in bad form because it looks like a 0, but when I told them it represents the courage you have to talk to girls, they thought it was fine. Bear in mind it is a pretty substantial multiplier, so really sit down and think, out of all the recent opportunities that you've had to ask someone on a date, how many moments did you let slip away, and how many moments were you at least 7 out of 10 drunk? Now, next we have P, which is the fraction of people that you would be interested in, and figuring this out takes a bit of work, so if you're thinking, I can't be bothered, I'm down with anyone, then the P can be removed from the equation and you can use the new formula. Okay, so assuming that's not you, we have to be able to figure out how many people in the world that you would be interested in. Now, there are 7.4 billion people in the world, so if you're a straight male, biologically speaking, you have 3.7 billion potential partners, but we'll say 4 billion because it's 2017. Now, obviously, you don't want to date someone underage, so we'll say they're at least 18, and you don't want to date someone too much older because then you're less likely to have much in common. Given my age, I'd say that caps out somewhere around 32 or 35. So, obviously, I prefer if they were single, but wouldn't be the first time I've broken up a marriage. Shout outs mom and dad. So let's focus in on the English-speaking countries, and this is personal preference, but I think a sense of humor is really important for both parties, so I'd really like to date someone who's at least as funny as me.
How is that possible?
Now, I'm pretty vain, so I want any accidental kids to be as good looking as possible. I'm not going to say I'm only going to date 8s and higher because people tend to end up with other people who they perceive to be in the same league, so we'll say 8s and higher with low self-esteem. Okay, so I'm looking for an English-speaking girl who's good-looking, single, and laughs at my jokes. That sounds pretty accurate. And after eliminating countries that aren't really viable, that ends up at around 10 million or 1 in 100 people, which is our value P. Okay, so moving on to the third and final variable, we need to figure out E, how many encounters you have in a given time frame. Now, the best way to do this is actually recording how many new people you meet in a year, month, or week, and then just extrapolating. But if you're just looking for a ballpark, they say the average person will interact with about 80,000 people in their life, which is about 2.7 people a day. So if you're a math guy, just use Euler's number as a default. I decided to actually count how many new people I've said hello to this last month, and that number ended up being about 2.5 a day. Unfortunately, the number of people who said hello back was about 1.8. That made me sad. Now, for the final step, if we take all the values that we have so far, we can put them into the HOPE formula, do some simplifying, do a little bit of number crunching, and the chance of meeting someone who could be the one for you is 1.35% per day or 99% per year. All in all, that doesn't sound too bad, so with the good news behind us, when the day comes and you do finally meet someone who could be the one for you, all you have to worry about now is finding out if you're the one for them. Conveniently, this formula is exactly the same. All we have to do is take the HOPE formula and then substitute the H for an N before proceeding as normal. So the hoodies are actually in now, and we also have some mugs, so you can check those out at Casually